In this episode, we're setting up AI perception hearing. So he can't see me, but he just heard me, and now he's looking for me. And let's see if he finds me. Yep, he's got me. Let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and today we're setting up AI perception hearing to be integrated with the rest of our AI character. Over the last 3 episodes, we've set up our AI to be able to play a pretty solid game of hide and go seek, but the piece that's remaining is our AI still can't hear anything, so if something happens around a corner, it doesn't know about it. And there's really 2 parts to this AI perception hearing, because we need to be able to differentiate between what are character-driven sounds that our AI perceives versus sounds that are ambiguous or it knows to be non-character-driven sounds. So an obvious example of this that we've already covered in this series is we have fireball explosions. So our AI needs to be able to know, okay, that's an explosion. It's not happening directly next to whatever caused it. That's a separate cause than something that's directly caused by a character. So for example, if you hear a footstep or you hear breathing in the dark, depending on the type of breathing, you can still tell, is that a dog? Is that a person? So the AI is going to have that level of differentiation. And everything with our AI that we set up this episode, it's going to integrate seamlessly with what we did last episode. And that was taking the environment query system, EQS, and enable our AI to search intelligently based on our target's last known location. Because now with sound, when our AI hears a sound that it knows to be a character-driven sound, like a footstep, we're going to feed that directly into the same setup we did in our behavior tree for EQS. And then the AI can look for its target accordingly. So if you haven't checked out that last episode on EQS, I strongly encourage you to do so. So here are our key concepts for this episode. Everything is revolving around AI perception hearing and how we report various kinds of noise back to our AI. So let's get to it. So we're going to start today in our AI controller that we set up 3 episodes ago. And I'm going to navigate to my content drawer. Mine's located in my core folder under AI, our adversary AI controller. And I'll navigate over to the event graph. So 3 episodes ago, we set up on target perception updated, AI perception has line of sight. And right away, we're faced with a choice on how we design this. And to be honest, I might be going down the wrong road here. So if there's a good reason to avoid doing what I'm doing this episode, please post in the comments below. But that choice is, do we simply update our AI perception component with a second sense? So we can come over here to the right, we can add to our array here, and we can do an AI hearing config. Or, and this is the route that I'm going to go down this episode, we can create a second AI perception component and set that second one up for hearing, and our first one we stick with sight. And the main reason that I'm doing that is I'm going to stick with different events for each. So on target perception updated is going to be the event for each, but this way we can differentiate what it's going to do when it specifically has line of sight, like when we know our target, when we see the target, versus when we just hear the target and we don't know exactly where that target is, but our AI needs to be in more of an exploratory mode to find it. And we might be able to differentiate the perception some other way via like tag or something like that, but I just think it's going to be way cleaner if we have a completely separate event and we can differentiate easily between the two. So like I said, if there's a good reason not to do that, please let me know in the comments below, but that's what we're going to do. So we're going to right click here, we're going to rename, and we're going to call this the AI perception site component. And then we'll come up under add and we'll search for AI perception and we'll add a second component. And this one's going to be aptly titled hearing. So compile and save that. So now on this new AI perception component, we need to set up our hearing sense. So in the details panel, I'm going to hit + under senses config, and then index here, I'm going to choose AI hearing, and then we'll expand that and expand the sense. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the range of this to quite a bit, basically the size of my level. So it's going to be about 10,000, because if we have a really big sound like a large explosion, I want our AI to be able to detect that even if it's across the map. And the other thing I found is that for AI sight, under detection by affiliation, we also had to check off neutral, but for AI hearing, we have to check off both neutrals and friendlies. For whatever reason, whenever it hears initially, I found that it's always labeled as a friendly. And like I mentioned 3 episodes ago, there's not a way in Blueprints currently to be able to say, okay, this particular target, this is a neutral or this is an enemy. There's not a way of being able to go into the actor and flag it. So that's why we're using the actor as tag here. So in short, our hearing component is set up to detect everything. And so now I'm just going to expand this a little bit so you can see it. So we're going to select the on target perception updated, the little plus sign here. And I'll make our details panel back to regular size. And then we have a second event right here. We're going to put that directly under our AI perception site event. And the first thing we're going to do just to test this is we'll do a print string. And we're not just going to print anything. We are going to print the strength of the sound. So from stimulus, I'm going to break AI stimulus and then get our strength of a sound. And actually before that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to append this. You've seen this trick before if you're following this series. Strength of sound. and then I'll connect up our strength here. So we'll compile and save this, but now we actually have to set up something in our game to generate a sound. And for that, we have to use what's called a noise event. Now, if you've been following this series, you already have footstep sounds set up like we did in episode 19. If you're not following this series, that's totally fine. You can follow along with what I'm about to do, but just do it on any sound in your game. So back in episode 19, we set up a blueprint function library for our footstep sounds, and that way they could be used by any humanoid character. So now we're going to generate noise events off of those footstep sounds. So we got to go back to our content drawer, back to content. I saved mine under blueprint function libraries, and then pawn, human, and human character BFL. And we're going to start in the footstep sound function. These are all the different free footstep sounds we downloaded from Zapsplat, ranging from wood to grass to stone, you name it. But to make this happen properly, to report noise events via this function, is we're going to need 2 additional variables. And I'm going to make them local variables along with these. So to do that, I'm going to zoom in here, come over to our inputs here. And under our inputs on the right, I'm just going to hit +, and we're going to create a new variable that's titled our footstep instigator, because we have to tell this function who actually generated this footstep, or what character. And that, instead of Boolean, that's going to be an actor reference. So I'll come down, select actor, object reference. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move all these out a little bit, and we are going to promote this to a local variable. Move this over here, rename our local variable. It's going to be our local footstep instigator, and a little reroute. Connect this up here, connect it up over there. And then the second local variable that we don't need this as an input, but we do need it here as a local variable. This is going to be footstep loudness. And this is going to be a float. So then I'm going to zoom out, and we're going to start at the top, work our way down. So back in episode 19, I was doing some funky stuff. So I basically set it so that any part of the land that's under 65, under -65, I basically consider that to be wet dirt. Yeah, so if Z is less than -65, then use wet dirt sound for all landscape materials. But it's only for landscape materials. It wasn't for everything else. So it wasn't for stone. It wasn't for all this other stuff. And so we got to set how loud each of those footsteps is going to be depending on the material. And that's going to determine whether or not our AI actually hears the sound based on how close it is, but also based on how loud this variable is. And so what I'm going to do is on the right-hand side here, I'll just drag in a reference to each one. We're going to set it, and it's going to be set to a different value for each of these. And I'll just give you my values here. And by the way, I should mention that in the description below, you can find a spreadsheet to all the different sounds that I ended up setting. So wet dirt, we're going to set this to 20. I'll duplicate this, connect it up. And for stone, this is going to be set to a much higher value. So this is going to be 80. Copy this, paste it, and for wood, it's going to be slightly lower than stone, 70. And to be honest, I'm not picking this in any scientific manner. I'm just guessing in my head how loud each of these substances would be realistically walking or running on them. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of these, come down here, paste, connect these up here. So these are our walking sounds. So wet dirt for walking, this is going to be 10. Stone is going to be 40, and wood is also going to be 40. Once again, I'll copy all of these. We'll come down to our regular sounds, connect all these up, and then I got to duplicate it 2 more times. All right, so these are running sounds. So starting with footstep forest, so this one is going to be 50. Footstep grass, this one's very soft. So even when running, it's pretty soft, 20. Then we'll come down a little bit. This is gravel, so that's pretty loud. So that's going to be 90. Then stone, that's also loud. That's going to be 80. And finally, wood. That's going to be a little bit quieter, but not much, 70. And so now I'll duplicate all those, copy all those, paste them down here, connect them up. And these are all the walking sounds. So forest floor is going to be 30. Grass is going to be 10. Gravel dirt is going to be 50. Stone is going to be 40. And wood is also 40. All right, so we have our footstep loudness set now for every single sound, but how do we actually report the noise event? So for that, we are going to connect up every one of these nodes to a single node. So I'm just going to right click, we're going to do a report noise event. And we got a whole bunch of pins. So our world context object, that's basically the actor that's calling this function. So the actor that's calling this function is going to be our local footstep instigator. So I'll get that connected up. And that's also going to be aptly titled our instigator. And the instigator is what is actually generating this sound. So whatever we pass into this function as the actor right here, that's going to be set as the local instigator. So back to this. So the loudness, we'll get our footstep loudness here, connect that up. And from episode 19, we already have a footstep location. That's going to be our noise location. Connect that up like so. So now I got to connect up every single one of these to this node. So the way I'm going to do that is drag out from here. We're going to do a reroute, and then we're going to do a series of reroutes to connect to reroute. So we're going to do a reroute here. This is kind of arduous. Sorry, I still think this is the easiest way to do this. And we're going to do the same thing over here. Reroute, basically connecting each of the 3 to a 1, and then each of those 1s to its own 1. All right, so now we've got our 4 reroute nodes, so we can drag out a pin, connect to this reroute node. And although there's a lot of spaghetti going on here, it is pretty simple to follow, so I don't think it's too much of a problem. Last one. So if your entire footstep function looks like that, you've got everything set up for our report noise event. There's just one last thing we have to do here, and that is we are going to give the noise event its own tag. Now, if you hear a footstep sound, I suppose it could be a weird footstep sound, like if it's a Yeti, but typically if every character has shoes, shoes make a distinct type of sound, it's going to sound like a person. So we are going to give these sounds a tag of character. And that's simply a way of differentiating these noise events from every other noise event that's going to occur in the game that's not related to a character. But now, before we test this, we still have to do something because we just set up an input for the footstep instigator, but we never passed in who that instigator is, like what character. And so for that, we got to go wherever this function is being called. Now, I just happen to know in my case that the function is called on our animation blueprint, so that's where I'm going to go. If you're using a different setup for your sound, you just need to figure out wherever it's being called in your game. So before that, I'm going to compile and save, and then we'll go back to our content drawer, back to the content folder, core, into my third-person character animation blueprint. And we set this up back in episode 19, so I'm just going to come up here a little bit. I've got 2 events, one for our left foot plant and our right foot plant. And right over here, we have our footstep sound function. And so for that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a reference to our character, drag that in here, connect up our character directly to the instigator. And the same function on our right foot. So right here, connect it up. So if you got all that, we should be all set to test. So compile and save this. And back in our adversary AI controller, just make sure you're getting the strength and then printing that out here. So if we're all set, then let's test. So for this test, make sure you've got your AI in the world, because obviously if it's not in the world, that AI perception event's not going to trigger, so nothing's going to print. But you see in the top left corner that every time our AI takes a footstep, it's actually triggering. So we haven't yet differentiated between footsteps that are that character's own footsteps versus footsteps that are coming from another character. So we'll have to do that. But let's check our character here now, because as I take footsteps here, this is gravel, so it should print 90 up in the top left corner. 90, 90, 90, 90. If I go on rock, it should be 80. So let's see, 80, 80. But it's also unaffected by how far away from the AI we are, right? So it's always that full strength. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that that sound is affected by distance. So on our adversary AI controller, when we break the AI stimulus, we have the stimulus location, which is where that sound is coming from, and we have the receiver location, which is obviously our AI character. So we can get the distance between these two. So I can drag out a pin from receiver, and we're going to get the distance vector. And then we can connect up to the bottom our stimulus location. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the strength of our sound and we're going to divide that by the distance, because as our character gets further away, as that sound is originating a further and further distance away, we want this overall strength to be less. And then I'm going to change this in the append to be strength of sound upon hearing. So it's a distance-based sound, and we can connect it up just like this. But while we're here, let's also fix the other issue, which is the character themselves was detecting their own sounds, their own footsteps. So the way we're going to differentiate for the AI sounds generated by that same character versus another character is we're going to come up to event on possess, and I'm just going to make a little bit of space here, because what we're going to do is we're going to right-click, promote our possessed pawn to a variable, and we can keep that name possessed pawn. That's just fine. Actually, I'm going to eliminate the extra space in between. You know my beef with extra spaces. And then now that we have this variable, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come down here. We're going to get our actor here, and we're going to compare that. So we're going to do an equals equals. We'll compare it to our possessed pawn. Connect this up. I'm just going to make a little bit more space here. So move our print string up. Because if these two things are the same, so if the actor that's generating the sound is the same as our possessed pawn, then just going to do a print string. Sound from myself. And then only if this is false does it do this. Let's compile and save this. And now when the character moves around, the only thing that should be printing is this sound from myself. It shouldn't actually be printing the strength of the sound. It's only when our own character moves around that it'll print something. And now it'll be based on the distance away from the sound, in addition to whatever it stepped on. So let's test this. All right, so we see those sounds from myself. And now I'm going to move around. Strength of sound upon hearing, it's no longer even close to 90. It's a fraction of that because we're really far away from the character. But that's also why I set the distance to be 10,000, is so that the character can at least perceive that sound even though it's really far away. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set a threshold where if that sound is below a certain level, then our AI character won't actually hear it. They won't actually be able to act on that sound. So we'll go back into our adversary AI controller. And what we're going to do, I'm going to delete this out and I'm going to move this over quite a bit. I'm going to move all this stuff over because we have to create some space here. And instead of equal sign, I'm just going to delete this too, because instead we're going to do a not equal and then connect up our possessed pawn. So this is going to be one of several criteria that's going to determine whether or not our AI character actually hears the sound. Now they're always going to perceive it, but they're not necessarily going to hear it. And by hearing, I guess I mean that they're able to take that sound into consideration in the behavior tree. So our first criteria is that the sound is not from the actor themselves. So I'm going to move this over. I'm going to move up our AI stimulus here. I'm also going to delete out the print string here, delete out this. Move in our distance right over here. Move in the divider over here. So the second criteria is going to be this value is going to have to be greater than some threshold. And the threshold I'm going to set is 0.03. And I just came to this threshold through a lot of experimentation. So I checked to see, okay, can the AI hear me stepping on stone at this distance? Can they hear me stepping on gravel, stepping on grass? And this was a pretty good threshold, like realistic for human hearing. So if both of these are true, so we'll do an AND statement. So the sound is not from our possessed pawn, and the sound has a strength that's greater than 0.03. And the last criteria I'm going to hook up, just like 3 episodes ago, successfully sensed. I don't know if this is actually necessary, but I'm going to do it because it's Unreal Engine's recommendation. All right, so we got those 3 criteria. Then I'm going to hook it up to the branch. So this branch is to determine, did we actually hear the sound? Did the AI hear it such that it can incorporate what it learns into that behavior tree? But now we have one more differentiator to apply. And this differentiator is the last thing we set up on our BFL, on our blueprint function library. And that was in the noise event, this tag of character. Because you heard me say all the way in the beginning of the episode, we want to distinguish character sounds from other sounds. And so what we're going to do is get a reference to this tag here, and we're going to check to see, is it equal to, and we got to type this in verbatim, so make sure you spell it exactly. I don't know if case sensitive matters, character. And so then I'm going to come over here to the right, we're going to do a second branch. And if this is equal to character, then it's going to do character related stuff. And if it's not a character sound, like an explosion out in the distance, then it's going to do other stuff. I'm just going to add a reroute here just to clean this up a little bit. So now what we can do with this branch over here, we can do 2 print strings. So we'll do a print string here and we'll say character sound, exclamation points. And then I'll copy that print string and we will say not a character sound. Now we haven't actually set up any other sounds to generate noise events, so this is not going to work. But that's what we're going to do next. So let's first test this. So we'll compile and save. We'll test that. And then we'll set up a second sound that's not a character sound. And so the way I recommend testing this is start from a far distance away from your AI character and then move towards it. So this far away, nothing detected, so nothing printing. Character sound, there we go. So now let's set this up for non-character sounds. And we're going to do this with the explosion sound that we set up in episode 31, but feel free to use any sound in your game to test this next part. So for the explosion sound, I'm going to navigate to the content drawer, over to content, into our blueprints, and then into our spawn from abilities, because we set it up on the BP fireball. And this fireball we originally created back in episode 30, which is our fireball episode, and then 31 was the actual explosion episode. And we got to go into our explode fireball function. And this is basically a function that does a bunch of things with the Niagara system, but it also plays a sound. So at the end of this string of events, I'm just going to drag out a pin and we are going to report noise event. And for the noise location, I'm just going to get our actor location. So get actor location. And for the loudness, I'm going to get our intensity at explosion. And again, we set this up in episode 31. And I'm going to multiply this by 3. And the reason I'm doing that is because the intensity on average is about 100. And these explosions should be loud. So this is going to be about 300. If you compare that to a sound like a footstep, even walking or jumping, it's going to be a lot louder than that. So I'll connect this up. But then for the instigator, this is going to be the fireball itself. So I'm just going to get a reference to self and connect this up. And the other thing I should mention here is that if you set the max range to 0, if you just keep it at 0, then it means no limit. But it says still limited by the listener's range, however. And for the tag, I'm not labeling this character sound. So this is just going to be tag, keep it at none. So we'll compile and save this, and then we're ready to test the fireball. All right, there's our AI in the distance, really far away. I don't know if we're going to be close enough for it to hear the fireball, but let's get our fireball ability and then we'll find out. All right, so here we go. 1. Not a character sound. There we go. So it is hearing it. Now if I move a little bit closer, it should start hearing me. There we go. Got me. So now that we got our AI successfully sensing these sounds, now we got to incorporate that sense into our behavior tree. So for that, I'm going to go back to the content drawer, back to content, core folder, AI, and the behavior tree that we started 3 episodes ago. Now, the way I'm envisioning incorporating this, it's really simple. We're going to use everything we set up last episode in EQS. So last episode, we run an EQS query whenever we lose line of sight of our target. And the query is based on where the AI last saw its target. And then we update, based on that query, our Blackboard value for last known target location. And so all we're going to do whenever our AI character hears another character, then it's going to update this exact Blackboard key with that location. And the one thing I should mention, so if we go back to our adversary AI controller, so we're not going to do anything with this type of sound this episode. But once we start getting into how our AI is going to react to gameplay abilities, whether it's using those abilities or those abilities are being used on the AI, then we're going to have to incorporate this behavior here where our AI is hearing things that it's not directly acting on. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So for now, I'm just going to move this down, move this over. And I'm going to start by copying what we set up last episode in the has line of sight function. And so what we did last episode is we set up a new Boolean variable for previous target recently detected. And we're going to use that same Boolean variable because when we hear a character, then it's going to be recently detected. We heard it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this here, go back over to our event graph, and I'll paste that in. But before we connect it up, I'm going to go back to has line of sight. There's one more thing we're going to get, and that's our clear recently detected clear timer by function name here. And then come back to our event graph and paste that in. Because as soon as we hear something, and then we're going to reset this timer. So this timer is there to call this function after, I think it's like 24 seconds. If I go into that function, what it's doing is it's going to say previous target recently detected, uncheck. So our AI character hasn't recently detected the target. So back to our event graph. And the reason we're clearing that timer is because obviously if we just heard something, we recently detected the target. So we'll connect this up. And the reason we need this variable to be set to true is because in our behavior tree, that's what's allowing this informed search for player to take place. So it goes off of the previous target recently detected Boolean. But we also need to update our last known target location here. So back to our AI controller. And instead of having to type all that out, I'm just going to get it from our clear sense target function. So that's this make literal name here, and the set value is vector, and the Blackboard here. So copy those three things. Back to our event graph, come over to the right, paste them in. Move this over a little bit, connect this up. So now we got to give it a vector value. And so that's going to be, if we come back all the way to the left, that's going to be our stimulus location. So I can take this pin from our break AI stimulus, move it all the way over, connect it up. And of course, I'll put in a reroute. So let's compile and save this, and we are ready to test. And the way to test this is we got to have our behavior tree open, similar to what we did 3 episodes ago, because what I'm going to make sure occurs is we got to make sure that this current movement goal location, last known target location, actually updates every time my character takes a footstep. So I'll move this over to the right and we'll test. So let's just make this a little bit bigger so I can actually see it. So right now it's invalid because it hasn't detected its target yet. But let's move over there, and as soon as I get within hearing range, it should update. Yep, so now it just got a location. I see it there. Every time I take a footstep, I see it, and now it's got line of sight. Now it's got me. So far, so good. So just so this episode doesn't take an extra 20 minutes, I went ahead and I updated all the other sounds that are in this series thus so far. And if you want the detailed list, you can consult the spreadsheet that's linked in the description below, but let me just give you a really quick overview. So if we go back to our blueprint function library, the human character BFL that we started in episode 19. So we already did the footstep sound function, but the jump land sound function is the next thing that I did. And so the first thing I had to do is I also needed a footstep instigator for that, and then our local variable here. And then towards the very end of this, I also set our footstep loudness for each sound. So here's the top 3, and then here's our bottom 5. So forest floor, grass, dirt jump, stone, and wood. And what you'll notice with the jump land sounds is it's basically the exact copy of footstep sound, but each of the loudness is doubled. Because I'm basically assuming that jumping and landing is about twice as loud as a footstep. And then for our report noise event, it's the exact same thing, and it's still character. So for this function, again, you'll need that local footstep instigator and then footstep loudness. Now the footstep loudness is set here, and the local instigator is set here. So then on to the footstep water splash sound. So this one was episode 20, our water sound effects. And luckily it's a little bit easier. So we still need our footstep instigator and setting our local footstep instigator variable. So for each of these functions, you need to set that local variable. But then on the right-hand side, so every single path here, they all feed into this report noise event here. And basically what I'm doing here to generate the noise event is I'm getting our ground speed and our depth of water. I'm basically assuming that if the water is deeper, it's going to be louder. And then also if the character is moving faster, it's going to be louder. So our ground speed typically at 500, it'd be about 125 when divided by 4. But you got to remember, so back in episode 20, I think we set it up such that when the character moves through water, they actually slow down. So if they are going at 500, and let's say the depth of water is 50, so that would be 125 plus 50, 175 divided by 2, the loudness would be about 85, 90. And I thought about this one. It's a little bit less obvious that it should be labeled a character sound, but I think for water splashes, yeah, I'm going to keep it that way. But further on in this series, we are going to have a gameplay ability or two that's going to be able to throw objects, and those objects could land in the water, so I might reevaluate that. We'll see. So that's the footstep water splash sound function, but now we can go on to the jump land water splash sound. Same kind of thing. We get our footstep instigator as an input variable. One little tip, this is something I didn't know until recently. You can actually reorder the inputs here by just clicking all the way on the left-hand side, and then you click and then you drag and you can move something up or down. So that's how I kind of reordered these, by putting the footstep instigator before sphere trace collision hit. And of course we set our local variable, and then the function here is much, much easier, because for a jump, we don't need to worry about how fast our player is actually moving. I guess I could consider how fast they're moving vertically, but I'm not doing that. We're just getting the depth of water. And to be honest, I probably need to clamp this. So let me do this. I'm going to clamp this between 0 and 200, because we don't want that sound to be more than 200, even if the player is going into really deep water. So I'll do this and connect this up just like this. So that's it for footstep and jump effects that we set up in this series thus so far in this blueprint function library. We still need to update the animation blueprint, but let me show you those updates in just a second. Before then, let's go into our gameplay abilities, and let me show you what I set up for sound for noise events on our gameplay abilities. So back to the content drawer, we're going into blueprints, gameplay abilities, and then we're going to start with fire. And this is on our event graph. So all I did is on activate primary fire ability effect, whether it's single cast, which is our fireball, or channel, which is our flamethrower. It's still doing the exact same thing. And I thought about it for the flamethrower because it's a channeled spell, it's continuously making sound. I thought about needing to continuously trigger a noise event. And I might end up updating that, but I don't think it's necessary so much, simply because our character is remaining still after that noise event occurs. I suspect though, once we actually get into gameplay with multiple characters, that I am going to need to continually trigger the report noise event for the flamethrower. And so for that, I'll probably end up doing it in the volume and pitch adjustment based on intensity function. And for the air ability, that's what I did. So let me show you how I'm doing that. So gameplay ability air, and that's our speed and jump boost ability that we started in episode 39. So for that one, I did it in the volume and pitch adjustment based on intensity, because the character using this ability is going to be floating through the air, obviously moving through the air, so that noise event needs to be continuously triggered. But because they're just moving through the air kind of on a cloud, I don't want it to be all that loud. So let me show you what I did. So at the very end of this function, so all the way at the end of this chain, so what I did is I used a random bool with weight node. And what this does with a weight of 0.9 is it means 9 out of 10 times when this gets called, it's going to be true. So only 1 out of 10 times will it hit this false pin, and that's when it reports noise event. And this is being triggered every 0.03 seconds. So instead of being triggered 30 times a second, this is only going to be triggered like 3 times a second, which I think is plenty. And because this is an air ability where the character that's using it is literally floating through the air, I don't want it to be all that loud, but it should create some sound. So I basically got the intensity of the ability, divided it by 3, and that's our sound. So a few more sounds that we've already done in this series. So we have our pain vocalizations, what are actually grunts. So that was episode 42. So for that, I'll go to the content drawer, core folder. We set those up on our third person character blueprint. And in our functions under receive damage, it's the took damage sound effect function here. So all I did is after each of the 3 sounds that potentially plays, depending on how much damage was actually taken, depending on our current health ratio, at the very end of that chain, I just do a report noise event, I get our damage taken, and I multiply that by 5. Because let's say we took only 20 damage, it's still going to be loud because our player's going, ugh! Now if we took like 80 damage, which is the vast majority of our health, yeah, that's going to be a loud yell. Probably a scream in that case. So the last thing I did is I updated our animation blueprint, so all the functions that we're calling for footsteps and jump landing pass in the footstep instigator. So let me show you how I did that. So back in the animation blueprint. So let's go over to the event graph and zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. So it's these 2 functions here for our left footstep and then our right footstep, right foot plant. So we already updated our footstep sound here, but we also need to update the footstep water splash sound, which is above. And this again was episode 20. So if I come up to the top one, it's also here. And then we have another one we still need to do. And this, to be honest, I think is the sloppiest build that I've done in this series. So I hope to change this at some point, but it's the jump land sound and effects that we've got up here. So we got to go into that macro. And this was also episode 20 and then into 21 as well. So we've got a couple different ones here. So jump land water splash sound, have to connect up character to our footstep instigator. And then also down here, jump land sound, connect up character to footstep instigator. And then once you've got this set up in your game, all the sounds making noise events, I recommend just testing this out on a sound by sound basis. And you could do a print string for each one and just make sure that it's triggered whenever it should be. And you can also do the print strings on the AIPerception component on the event, just to make sure that you're setting the right threshold for when the AI detects that sound. So the last part of this episode, as always, the cleanup. So I'm going to close out of all this stuff. We are good with all of that. And instead, we are going to go into our AI folder, back into our adversary AI controller. So if I zoom out here, what we're going to do is we're going to collapse everything past the last branch. We're going to collapse all of this down to a function. We're going to keep our print string here, not a character sound, just for the future when we start getting into that. So for all of this stuff, I'll right click, collapse to function, and I can move this in. I'm going to change the name of this function to heard character, one word. And then if I go into that function, let's update the input pin here. So I'll just move this out a little bit, put in a reroute. And the input pin, instead of input pin, I'm going to make this the heard location. Compile and save. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start categorizing these functions because we've hit 5 and that's basically my limit before categorization. So the category is going to be AIPerception. And I'll just select that for 4 out of the 5, so not our construction script. So heard character, AIPerception. So that wraps up our episode for today. But in our next episode, we're doing quiet crouching, both for our AI, but also for our player character. So I hope to see you there.